Respect is the foundation of every bond that endures, and when it fades, everything else begins to fracture quietly. Rarely does disrespect arrive as a single dramatic event. Instead, it seeps in through small, repeated gestures. A dismissive comment, a laugh at your expense, a disregard for your time. Each may seem insignificant alone, but together they form a pattern. Over time, these small fractures build into a truth that cannot be ignored. The connection no longer honors you. To stay in such an atmosphere is to slowly accept invisibility, and invisibility is the death of dignity. Carl Jung often wrote that the shadow reveals itself in the way a person treats others, especially when confronted with boundaries. A man's shadow side emerges when he consistently diminishes, mocks, or ignores the limits placed before him. It is not the occasional human error that matters, everyone stumbles, but the repeated inability to treat your voice as significant. When his shadow shows itself through constant disregard, you are no longer witnessing flaws to be forgiven, you are witnessing a pattern of devaluation. The psychological impact of remaining in such a space is profound. A woman begins to question whether her needs are valid at all. She minimizes her own discomfort, convincing herself that she is being too sensitive. Yet the more she tolerates disrespect, the more she internalizes it. Her self-image bends under the weight of someone else's refusal to honor her, until she begins to feel unworthy of respect altogether. What began as his failure eventually becomes her wound, unless she sees the truth and chooses to step away. Daily life offers countless examples of these small betrayals. You voice a concern, and he dismisses it with sarcasm. You set a limit, and he rolls his eyes as if your boundary were a nuisance. You express an achievement, and he responds with indifference or comparison instead of recognition. None of these actions are violent in isolation, but their repetition erodes self-esteem. They tell you that in his world, your presence does not carry weight, and to remain where you are not valued is to allow yourself to be diminished. The distinction between a momentary mistake and a constant pattern is crucial. A man who respects you may fail once, but he will apologize and adjust. A man who does not will repeat the behavior, expecting you to adapt. This is the difference between imperfection and disrespect. Imperfection is human. Disrespect is a choice. The woman who recognizes this difference protects not only her dignity, but also her future. Jung might say that the call to walk away at this stage is an act of individuation. To leave a place where respect no longer exists is to affirm the self as whole, rather than fractured by another's disregard. It is to say, I will not allow your shadow to eclipse my worth. Walking away becomes less about him and more about reclaiming the parts of yourself that began to disappear under his neglect. Ultimately, the absence of respect is the first and clearest signal that it is time to go. Without it, there can be no trust, no safety, no genuine love. The woman who values herself enough to leave when recognition is gone does not lose, she regains. She regains her dignity, her clarity, and her voice. And in that act, she honors the truth that love without respect is not love at all, but a slow erosion of the soul. Silence in its healthy form is a bridge. It allows space for reflection, for breathing, for presence without words. But silence can also be turned into a weapon, and when that happens, it corrodes the very foundation of a connection. Instead of nurturing peace, it punishes. Instead of offering space, it withdraws care. A man who uses silence as a tool of control is not seeking balance. He is seeking dominance. The absence of words ceases to be presence and becomes absence of respect, a void that eats away at self-esteem. Carl Jung would describe this misuse of silence as a projection of the shadow, the unconscious attempt to control what cannot be faced directly. When someone avoids confrontation not to preserve harmony but to manipulate, he reveals his inability to engage authentically. Genuine introspection requires honesty. Manipulative silence hides behind withdrawal. What seems like calm is, in truth, an evasion, and the woman who endures it begins to feel unseen, unacknowledged, erased by the very person she sought intimacy with. The psychological damage of living under this kind of silence is deep. At first, you may try to explain it away, believing he just needs time. But over time, the silence feels heavier than any argument could. Words can be resolved, absence cannot. You begin to doubt your own significance, wondering if you're asking too much simply by existing. The punishment is subtle but relentless, teaching you to fear expression, because any attempt to speak may be met with walls instead of dialogue. Daily life shows clear examples of when silence shifts from sacred to destructive. You ask a question and receive no response, not because he is reflecting, but because he wishes to control the atmosphere. You try to address a concern and he leaves the room, stretching silence into days, until you surrender to restore peace. You notice that his quiet is not rest, but resistance, not healing, but hostility disguised as calm. These moments do not restore balance, they drain it. The key is learning to distinguish legitimate solitude from manipulative silence. True solitude is chosen for self-reflection, and it returns with openness and presence. Manipulative silence returns only when you have bent yourself to restore the bond. The first builds intimacy, the second destroys it. Knowing this difference is essential, because staying where silence is used as punishment will eventually silence you from within. Here the archetype of the guardian emerges. The guardian protects what is sacred, and that includes the sacredness of silence itself. She knows when silence nurtures and when it destroys. Protecting her heart means refusing to remain where words are withheld, not out of peace but out of punishment. It means walking away from spaces where her voice is not met with presence, where quiet is used as a cage instead of a sanctuary. Ultimately, when silence ceases to be a language of intimacy and becomes an instrument of control, it is time to leave. A relationship cannot survive on absence, nor can love grow in punishment. A woman who values herself enough to recognize this difference honors the truth that silence, when sacred, is a gift, but when weaponized, is a wound, and she refuses to remain where wounds are disguised as love. There are relationships that drain more than they nourish, and this exhaustion is often one of the clearest signs that it is time to walk away. At first, the imbalance may not be obvious. You give affection, support, presence, and encouragement, believing that love is about generosity. But over time, you begin to notice that the flow is not mutual. Your energy goes out, yet little or nothing returns. Instead of feeling replenished by the bond, you feel emptied. What once gave you strength now leaves you tired, anxious, or invisible. Love that constantly depletes is not love. It is survival at your expense. Carl Jung described relationships as mirrors of the psyche, where each person's energy contributes to a shared field. When one gives endlessly while the other only takes, the field becomes unbalanced, reflecting the shadow of dependency and control. This shadow often hides behind excuses. He needs me. He is just going through something, or it's only a phase. But when the phase becomes a cycle, when the taking never transforms into giving, the truth emerges. What you are experiencing is not partnership but depletion, a silent erosion of your vitality. The psychological toll of this imbalance is severe. Living in function of another's constant needs leads to burnout. You begin to lose connection with your own desires, hobbies, and passions. Your days revolve around managing his moods, protecting his comfort, or carrying responsibilities he refuses to share. The more you give, the more invisible you feel. Over time, this dynamic corrodes self-esteem, leaving you with the belief that your worth lies only in what you can provide. This is not love. It is self-erasure disguised as devotion. Examples of this cycle appear in many women's lives. One stays with a partner who rarely shows gratitude, pouring herself into care while receiving indifference. Another supports a man's ambitions, while her own dreams remain abandoned. Another carries emotional labor endlessly, soothing, forgiving, adjusting, while her needs are brushed aside. These are not isolated sacrifices, they are patterns, and patterns matter. Because when the pattern is constant depletion, the relationship becomes a weight that suffocates rather than sustains. Breaking this cycle requires recognizing that nourishment is mutual. Healthy love does not demand perfection, but it does require reciprocity. When both give, both grow. When one gives and the other only takes, imbalance becomes exploitation. The truth may be painful, but facing it is the first step toward restoration. To continue in such a dynamic is to deny your own vitality. To walk away is to reclaim it. Stories of women who have chosen to leave reveal this transformation clearly. Many describe the exhaustion lifting within weeks, as if they had been carrying a burden that was never theirs. They rediscover laughter, creativity, and peace once the constant drain ends. They begin to remember who they were before the depletion and often find that their true self had been waiting all along. The departure, though difficult, becomes an act of rebirth. Ultimately, when your energy is consistently drained rather than nourished, the relationship is no longer serving love, but consuming it. Staying means slowly diminishing, leaving means choosing life. And the woman who recognizes this truth honors herself deeply by walking away. In doing so, she declares that her vitality, her health, and her spirit are sacred, and no bond that requires her to sacrifice them endlessly is worthy of her presence. One of the most painful signs that it is time to walk away is when your limits are no longer respected, but ridiculed. Every relationship requires boundaries to remain healthy, spaces where dignity, individuality, and respect are preserved. Yet there are men who respond to these limits with mockery, calling them drama, exaggeration, or overreaction. What they reveal in this behavior is not strength, but immaturity. A man who cannot honor a woman's boundaries shows that he is incapable of sustaining a mature bond. And when your limits are dismissed, it is not only your requests that are rejected, but your very worth. Carl Jung taught that the shadow is exposed in the way we treat what we do not understand. A man confronted with a woman's boundary faces the limit of his control. If his shadow is unresolved, he projects his discomfort onto her, turning her clarity into a flaw. He calls it drama because he cannot face the truth of his own inability to grow. In reality, the very boundary he ridicules is the one that could have preserved respect. But when he mocks instead of honoring, he demonstrates that respect was never his intention. The psychological impact of such dismissal is profound. Over time, a woman begins to doubt herself. She wonders if she is indeed too much, if her needs are unreasonable, if her dignity must be minimized to keep peace. This erosion of self-trust is often more damaging than the mockery itself. When limits are invalidated, she may begin to shrink, speaking less, asking for less, becoming less visible. Yet the paradox is clear. The less she asserts her limits, the less respect she receives. Silence does not preserve love. It feeds disrespect. Examples from daily life show how subtle this pattern can be. You ask for more consistency, and he laughs, calling you demanding. You request honesty, and he accuses you of paranoia. You express hurt, and he labels you dramatic. Each time, the pattern repeats. Your clarity becomes a weapon used against you. These are not minor disagreements. They are signals that your dignity is not safe in this space. Because when limits are minimized, love is no longer partnership. It is erosion. The paradox here is striking. The very boundaries that protect intimacy are often dismissed by those who cannot sustain intimacy. A man who mocks your limits is also mocking the foundation of the bond itself. Boundaries do not destroy relationships, they preserve them. What destroys a bond is the refusal to recognize them. And so the moment your boundaries are consistently invalidated, you are not protecting love by staying. You are sacrificing yourself for something that no longer exists. This is where the archetype of the queen becomes vital. The queen does not beg for respect. She embodies it. She does not justify her limits endlessly. She holds them with clarity. To her, dignity is not negotiable. She understands that the respect she demands externally must begin with the respect she gives herself. And when others attempt to belittle her boundaries, she does not shrink. She rises. Her presence communicates, "If you cannot honor my limits, you cannot stand beside me." Ultimately, walking away when your limits are dismissed is not weakness, it is sovereignty. It is the recognition that love cannot survive where dignity is mocked. A woman who values herself knows that her boundaries are sacred, and that anyone who treats them as drama is not a partner, but a threat to her wholeness. By leaving, she honors her own worth, embodying the paradox Jung understood so deeply. The boundary that others despise is the very one that ensures your true strength and lasting respect. There is a moment when no external sign is needed, because the truth has already been spoken within. A woman feels it in her body before her mind accepts it, the unease in her chest, the weight in her stomach, the sudden stillness that whispers, "Something is wrong." This intuition is not fragility. It is wisdom. Long before betrayal is visible, long before words confirm distance, the soul recognizes disconnection. Ignoring this voice is to abandon oneself. Listening to it is the first act of courage. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious communicates through symbols, dreams, and sensations. Intuition is one of its clearest languages, a way for the deeper self to signal truths that reason tries to deny. When a woman feels the shift, when gestures no longer align with words, when silence grows heavy instead of peaceful, when her spirit feels drained, her unconscious is already guiding her toward individuation. To heed that voice is to honor her wholeness. To suppress it is to fracture her dignity. The greatest danger lies in silencing this call. Many women cling to hope, telling themselves that things will improve, that they are exaggerating, that loyalty requires endurance. But each denial deepens the wound. The body aches, the nights grow restless, and the heart bends under the weight of false reassurance. Hope, when misplaced, becomes a prison. Intuition, when honored, becomes the key that unlocks freedom. Daily life offers countless examples. A woman senses dishonesty before evidence appears, and later discovers her intuition was right. Another feels the growing emptiness in his absence, only to realize he had already withdrawn emotionally. Another notices her constant unease around him, a tension she cannot explain until the truth surfaces that her energy was being eroded, not cherished. In every story, the intuition came first. The decision to listen came later. Walking away when your intuition calls is not failure. It is rebirth. It is the choice to place self-respect above fear, clarity above illusion. It is the recognition that dignity cannot coexist with denial. When a woman listens to her deepest voice, she steps back into alignment with herself. The pain of leaving is real, but it carries within it the seed of healing. The silence that once wounded becomes the space where her own voice grows louder. Jung would describe this step as individuation, the process of becoming whole by uniting the conscious and unconscious. When a woman listens to the alarm of her intuition, she integrates what her soul has already perceived. She no longer splits herself between what she feels and what she admits. In that alignment, she regains her center. She becomes Not the woman who waits to be valued, but the woman who values herself enough to leave. Ultimately, the moment you feel the truth within is the moment to act. To ignore it is to lose yourself. To honor it is to reclaim yourself. Walking away is not only escape, but transformation, a declaration that your life will no longer be defined by someone else's inability to honor you. It is the beginning of a new chapter where respect is no longer begged for, but chosen, and in that act, you step into the fullness of who you are, not abandoned, but reborn.